right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is our fourth video already, and we're starting on slide 10 here. Slide 10 reminds us of the problems that we focus on this chapter, and specifically right now we're going to focus on learning more and doing some investigations of problem number 1. So problem number 1 asks, how can we know when our ecosystems have an environmental problem? So how can we know if there's a species in trouble in the environment? So what we're going to do is we're going to learn a little bit about what scientists do to study if there's any problems. And we're specifically going to look at climate change and how it might be affecting populations in the environment, and how scientists try to measure the effects of climate change on populations. So you may remember, and slide 11 shows this, we studied how organisms are related in a food web. We know that organisms, like secondary consumers, rely on primary consumers. We know that the tertiary consumers, like this bear, rely on the secondary consumers. They eat them, right? So all these organisms depend on each other because they might be food. They rely on them for energy. So if an organism goes extinct, like if the bear went extinct, we know that it has an effect. We've discussed this. We've made arguments just like this. We made arguments about how the species will be affected, right? We've made hypotheses about which trophic levels are most sensitive to extinctions. So we know that scientists should care if a species goes extinct, because if one species goes extinct, it affects the populations of others. Now the question is how do scientists deal with climate change, and in what ways are populations changing to climate change? We know species might go extinct, but maybe there's other things, and let's learn. So this is a YouTube video made by the University of California, and it's locally talking about poppies. Now, California poppies are our state flower, and they are being impacted by climate change, possibly. Let's see what is happening with climate change in the U.S. So this is a professor, a biologist, and she's studying and she's showing that temperature has increased gradually over the U.S. So it used to be, they kind of say a general temperature. This was the past. It had a kind of a certain temperatures for all the areas. And then they say it transitions, and these are what we're seeing now. So different parts of our states, and the purple have warmed up the most. So climate change has involved a lot of heating up of our country, according to the professor. So this is the warmest, and then we have parts of Southern California and these other states across the U.S. are a little bit warmer, but not as warm. And then the least amount of warming has happened in the northern states, the ones closest to the northern latitudes. But each area has kind of different temperature changes, and everyone has kind of gradually warmed up a little across our country. Southern California, compared to Central and Northern California, has increasing temperatures of different amounts. The question is what is that doing to a species? So this is CNN News, and I put the closed captioning on so we can see what they're talking about. This is a reporter, and then this is a scientist studying plants currently. And she studies what the plants are doing right now. Let's see, I'm going to start the video, and let's just watch for a little bit.
You've been looking at the impact of climate change.
So this professor is studying the effect of climate change on plants, and she says that plants are flowering earlier. She says they're dropping their leaves a lot sooner. So the plants are responding to climate change differently, losing leaves or flowers. And she said they're also showing up in new areas where you wouldn't normally see. She said that they're now seeing some plants that used to love warmer weather, they're showing up in cooler environments. So plants are migrating as well. So they're showing up in new areas. So they're starting populations that they had never seen in new areas before. Next, she says, this scientist, this botanist says that the Arctic is greening. The Arctic is a northern latitude area, and it has biomes like the tundra and the taiga. And it's normally covered in snow most of the year, but this scientist is saying that the plants are growing there more, and there's more and more plants. It's greening. Let's see what else she has to say. She says they're getting more and more plants in very cold environments, or what used to be very cold, because a lot of the frost and snow and the permafrost is melting. Now, it says right here, the scientists have basically been studying these areas for 20 years. So the environment's changing a lot. It's getting warmer. More plants are growing in new areas. Very interesting. So climate change is apparently affecting plant populations in an environment that's not used to having so much autotrophs. All this information from our past studying of food webs and extinctions with climate change, and our new understanding of climate change and maybe how it's affecting plants. The question is what does a scientist do, or how can they know if the environment has a problem with climate change, right? So slide 12, you don't have to do anything. If you were in class, we would do this, but otherwise don't worry about it. But we're doing an activity called the Random Sampling Lab. And random sampling is a technique that biologists use to measure the populations of plants in an environment. Just like these poppies. These are the California poppies we were learning about. So, scientists don't always have time to count every single poppy in the environment. So, what they do is use special mathematics and statistics to estimate what the population of poppies is, and that's how they would try to figure out if there's a problem in the ecosystem. Because they know if there's changing populations, there might be a problem. So what we'll be doing in class is doing a special activity called random sampling to learn how they calculate or estimate a population without counting every single one of them. So you'll be doing the work of an environmental specialist. You'll be doing the work of an environmental biologist by estimating what the population of a group of poppies is in a field without actually counting all of them. You'll be able to predict with good likelihood how many are actually growing in this field without actually counting every single one. So hold on and I'll help you with it. So as you measure poppies in the field for our activity, you will be calculating average, and we've calculated averages before. This was our old slide from the Ecolicious notes. But remember, the average just means a typical value most often seen. And it's a value that best represents a group. So in this lab, in class, we'll be studying and calculating the average, just like we practiced before. All right, in this lab, we're going to have, everybody's going to have a worksheet, and it's going to have a bunch of black dots. And this all represents a field, and you're going to be measuring certain squares randomly and counting how many flowers or black dots are growing in each part of the square. So it says this grid represents a field. So this whole grid here is a field, and each dot represents a sunflower plant. So you're going to be following along in class. You'll pick random squares, just like C2 represents this square in the field, and you count how many flowers are growing in the field. As we go along, you'll end up collecting data and filling in a data table with how many flowers you've counted in different squares of the field. You keep going and going until you've counted 10 total samples, and then in class together we'll do these calculations. You'll get an average, just like we mentioned before. You're going to estimate how many flowers are growing in the entire field, even though you haven't counted them all. And then later, somebody will be your victim. You're going to actually try to count every single flower in the field. And then later you'll find out and calculate percent error, which is how close were you to the real number. So your estimation, how close was your estimation of flowers population compared to the actual flower population? And this is exactly what scientists do. And if they have a good low percent error, then they would in fact trust their calculations, and that's how they do their work. That's how they would find out if there is a problem in the environment. Because they know if the population is really low, there's some kind of problem. Slide 19 helps us with some of the questions on the worksheet, so you don't have to go worry about it right now, but in class we will be using it. Slide 20. Slide 20 introduces a new word that's important, when doing the random sampling lab. So the random sampling lab uses statistics to calculate what the population is. When you're estimating, you're actually doing statistics to predict what the population of poppies is in the field. Now, here is our first statistics word, and it's called sample. And that's slide 20. So in your notebook, write slide 20 and write sample is a set of data collected from a population. A sample are values obtained from data that can be used to represent a population. So anytime you look at a big population and you get a little info from them, it's called sampling or taking a sample. Let's practice what sampling means. Here is sample 1. An example of sample 1 is, of all the NBA players, we only looked at 2 players in the NBA in this sample, Kobe and LeBron. So sample 1, we only chose 2 people to collect data from out of the whole population of NBA players. So our sample is of 2 people for the whole NBA. And then sample 2 here is a little different. Sample 2 looked at Kobe, LeBron, and all the random fans. So our sample this time contains a lot more people, but not every single person in the world. It's just a sample of a group of people, including Kobe, LeBron, and random fans. Sample 2 is a lot bigger. You can see a lot more people are in this picture, right? So that's how big the sample is. And then sample 1 only had 2 people in it. All right, I've updated slide 20 a little, but we just got through talking about sample 1 contains 2 people, 2 very tall basketball players out of all the NBA players. It only includes 2. The question is, but if you compare sample 1 and 2, sample 2 has lots more people, contains 2 NBA players that are very tall, and it contains an audience that are probably shorter, and then sample 1 only contains 2 people that are very tall. The question is which of these samples would provide a better average for human height? So, which one of these do you think could be used to calculate an average? So if you added up the 2 heights and divided it by 2 for sample 1, you'd get an average for how tall human height would be. Or if you took all the people in this, including the 2 basketball players, and you added up all their heights and divided by the total number of people, you would calculate an average here. The question is which sample would give you a better average for human height? Sample blank. So in your notebook for slide 20, you'd write number 1 and then copy down this sentence phrase, and it says sample blank would make better height average because, and then say why you think. Why would this be better for a human average? So if you wanted to tell people what is the average human height, which sample would be better for calculating an average? Next, it says connect the idea of average. So remember what average means? It says check your notes. The definition for average, if we go back to here, says a value that best represents a group. So whatever average you want it to represent what you expect for a certain group of people. That's what averages are. They're supposed to represent the group really well. So it says sample blank is a bad choice. So sample 1 or 2, you choose. So in your notebook, write number 2, and then copy down this sentence phrase, and then I'll help you fill it out. It says sample blank is a bad choice to represent average. So which one of these samples would be bad to use to represent the average human height among people? And then it says this sample would or wouldn't, choose one of these only, choose would or wouldn't, and then you finish the sentence. Calculate an average, and then choose too tall or too short. So are you saying the sample would calculate an average too tall, or are you saying the sample would calculate an average too short, or are you saying this sample wouldn't calculate an average too tall or too short to represent most people? Complete the sentence as you best think in your notebook. All right, moving on, we have slide 21. Slide 21 is important for our random sampling lab. Slide 21 teaches us what percent error means. So in your notebook, go ahead and copy down percent error, please. So go ahead and pause and get down percent error. So percent error is important. It tells you how close you estimated a population to be. What I want you to do is use this calculation right here to solve A and B below for for slide 21. All right, good luck, and I'll see you next time.